Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, Communicating with a Loved One with Dementia. My name is Allegra Jaffe, and I am a social service specialist in the Caregiver and Supportive Service Unit with the Fairfax Area Agency on Aging. Before I introduce today's speaker, I will go over a few housekeeping items with you. Today's presentation is being recorded, and a link for the recording will be sent to all registrants a week from today. Also, there is a Q&A box, a little button where you can submit your questions. We're going to allocate a few minutes at the end of the presentation to address your questions. And lastly, there will be a brief survey as you sign out. So please take a moment to fill out that survey because it helps us create the programs that are relevant and important to our caregiving community. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Pam Ostrowski. Pam is a dementia caregiving consultant and guide. She provides a path to relieve the fear, anxiety, confusion, and guilt that family members experience when a loved one is diagnosed with dementia. She's lived this journey with her parents and coached hundreds of clients who provide care for their loved ones with dementia. Pam is the founder of Alzheimer's Family Consulting, a national speaker, a certified senior advisor, certified dementia practitioner, and is a certified in dementia care. She is also the author of the highly rated Alzheimer's guidebook, It's Not That Simple, Helping Families Navigate the Alzheimer's Journey, which is based on Pam's dementia and Alzheimer's journey with her parents. Pam has been so generous to donate one of her books, and we will be gifting that book to one of you, and we will notify you via email. Pam, thank you so much for being here, and I know that everyone in the audience today is looking forward to your presentation, so please take it away.
Thanks so much, Allegra. I appreciate the introduction and just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining us today as we kick off the Fairfax Caregiver Seminar Consortium series. Say that 3 times fast. So I want to welcome you all. Thank you for attending. This is the first step in actually working through the process of understanding what's going on inside of a person with dementia's mind. Now, I can tell you that I understand the fears, the frustration, and the anger. And one of the things that Allegra mentioned is that we will be raffling off a signed copy of my book, It's Not That Simple, Helping Families Navigate the Alzheimer's Journey. And the reason why we mention that is because it really does walk you through what this journey might look like. So I want to make sure that you have that opportunity. So I'm glad that you joined us live. And let's start by talking about why we're all here. So how many of you have gotten frustrated when your loved one asks a question over and over again, or doesn't seem to process a task? You tell them that they need to put their shoes on because we're leaving, and they don't do it. And I went through this on a 14-year journey with my mom, and my dad actually had vascular dementia, not Alzheimer's. And so this is Mom, this is the book, and I want to reassure you that I have now interviewed and worked with hundreds of clients one-on-one. And a lot of the stories that people have shared with me are about communication and how frustrating it can be. So my heart goes out to you. My mom actually went non-vocal 8 years before she passed away. So it's important that you understand that sometimes it's verbal communication, sometimes it's nonverbal communication. And that was one of the points that we wanted to make sure that we emphasized in this presentation. So let's take a step back for a second and say, realistically, why is this so important? Well, it's important that we understand that we need to be able to communicate with those with dementia of any sort, but specifically with Alzheimer's, because it tends to affect the verbal skills and the memory more than perhaps other types of dementia. And that means that if we have today 6.5 million Americans diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and most of that does occur over the age of 75, But let's think about that. The first baby boomers turned 75 last year. So you start to look at the number of people that you're going to be communicating with. And by 2029, all baby boomers will be 65 or over. So that means that 1 out of 5, when you're sitting around or at a restaurant or standing in line at a grocery store, you're going to need to be able to communicate with that 1 out of 5 people that may be suffering from some mild cognitive impairment all the way through, say, mid-stage Alzheimer's. So if that means also that 1 in 9 people, so 11% of our population over 65 has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. That's the diagnosed version, right? So that means that there's people out there who haven't been diagnosed. And if we have 70 million baby boomers, that means that there'll be about 7.9 million people with Alzheimer's by 2029, which is right around the corner, right? We're in 2023. So the next thing is, you're not alone. Check out this last statistic. 1 out of 6 Americans are providing care to an aging loved one. So some studies even say that it's almost 75% of our population in the United States that is caregiving. So you can understand why communication is so critical. And for me, these statistics are most important because I want you to know that you are not alone, that we are all going to have to learn these skills. So how do we communicate in general as human beings? There are basically 4 ways. Visual, so you'll hear someone say, oh, I see what you mean. So there are people who, and I'm one of them, where if you talk to me, I'm less likely to remember something than if you write it down for me or if you show me a picture. Auditory, so that's when you would tell someone something, oh, I hear what you're saying, or are you listening? That's when you'll hear, those are the cues, the verbal cues. Reading and writing is another way for people to learn. So it's a combination of visual and oral. So we have subvocalization. Has anyone ever heard when you're writing something down? So let's say it's a phone number and you write down 623-434, and you can hear in your head 623-434-0143. And don't dial that number. But subvocalization is that voice in your head. And so that's another way that we learn and commit data to memory. So learning is really being able to hear, listen, assimilate or intake, and then remember. And so the last one is kinesthetic, and kinesthetic is learning by doing. So, if I told you sit down and I sat down and patted my knees and showed that my knees were bent, that's kinesthetic. Teaching a child to ride a bicycle, telling them what to do, and then actually showing them what to do are 2 different things. So tip number 1 is,
hey, Pam,
yes.
Real quick, we're still on your very first slide. Did you mean to continue the PowerPoint slides?
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you so much.
I don't know why it didn't advance. Thank you. So it's important that you combine all of these when communicating, frankly, with anyone, but specifically with someone with Alzheimer's. You want to make sure that your loved one has the opportunity when you say something to actually process it. And here's the downside of that, is that you don't know which way is going to work and which way is not. So it's important that you try different ways. And we'll talk a bit more about that when we move on to the rest of the presentation. So tip number 2, how do you want your loved one to feel about your interactions with them? So the number 1 thing that I want you to remember from this presentation is that a loved one with dementia of any sort, frankly, is capable of remembering emotions more so than anything else. So that means if you get upset with them, or you get frustrated, or you are sad, or you're anxious, or any of those types of emotions that we might enter an interaction with, we bring that with us and they pick up on it. And they also think it's their fault. So they might get moody around you, or they might get angry with you because you're already frustrated and angry. So this is an important thing to note when you're starting a conversation or you're asking this person to do something, that you don't come in from a flurry of excitement, or if you've had a bad day at work and you come home, or somebody cut you off in traffic and you're upset about that. They don't know why you're exhibiting these emotions, but they will reflect them back to you. So it's really important to change your mindset when you are communicating with them. Don't think of this as a struggle or write them off as, well, they don't understand what I'm saying. Believe me when I say they are still in there, they're still in that body. The problem is that they have this veil that's preventing them from communicating out and processing in. That veil is those amyloid plaques and tau protein, tau tangles that prevent them from really responding the way that you would expect them to before they started showing signs of dementia. We want to make sure that you manage your expectations when you interact with them. So that means not being Debbie Downer or being projecting your expectations onto them, such as, well, you won't understand anyway, so what's the point in involving you in this conversation? Don't be dismissive is really what I'm saying there. And on the other hand, you want to make sure that you don't walk in and say, okay, so today we're going to go to the grocery store, then we're going to go to the bank, then we're going to stop by and see Aunt Susie, and then we'll come home and we'll have lunch. Way too much information. We'll talk about that in a minute. Here's the tough one, because I know as a family caregiver, or as any caregiver, frankly, your heart is breaking because you're anticipating losing this person and their personality and who they are. The bottom line is that their memories are there from, say, 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50, depending on their age, years ago. So live with them in that period of their lives. And that's where you'll see them shine. That's where those moments of joy will come through. And frankly, we all need those, because this is a disease where it gets very frustrating when someone doesn't remember things that you remember. And that's what our relationships as humans and our connection is based on, is our joint memories together. So if they don't remember the last 10 years, or they mistake your child or grandchild for you, which can happen, that's a pretty common symptom. Well, so what? Let's not be attached to so much their behaviors as being attached to the fact that they're still here and that they do remember that person. And then we'll give you some tips on how to communicate better with them along those lines to help them remember. And the key is, again, that they're going to remember emotions more than anything else. And so try to remember that you never argue with a person with dementia. So they may remember emotions. And I actually had one client, I was a husband, his wife had Alzheimer's, and he said, every time I walk in the door, she starts yelling at me and throwing stuffed animals at me, and I have to leave. And I said, okay, so let's back up. When this first started, what had happened? And he said, well, she wouldn't, put her sweater on, and I wanted her to put her sweater on, and she wouldn't do it. And so I said, oh, you had an altercation. You got mad and she got mad. He's like, well, yeah, but it was just about a sweater. It wasn't a big deal. And I said, oh, it was to her, because she remembered that anger and she associates that anger with you. So, his eyes opened wide and he's like, she can remember that? And I said, yes, she's going to remember emotions. So that's why we talk so much about moments of joy, building bonds, holding hands, rubbing their back, telling stories about 30 years ago, not about what happened at Johnny's soccer game this past Saturday, because that means nothing to them. So what is important to us can no longer be of value to them if they don't remember it, right? So that's why we really have to think when we're going to interact with this individual, we need to think about how what we say is going to resonate with them. And that means we have to plan a little bit and practice. Mostly it's practice how to talk with them. And that's why when I talk about how to communicate, communication is two-way. Talk is one way, right? So I am talking to you right now. I'm not communicating with you. So words are so important when it comes to these conversations. And so talking is something that an individual does to other people, one or many. And communication is about making sure that the words that you use are assimilated, that they're processed, and that whether it's one of those 4 ways of learning, and as I said, the more the merrier, that the person with dementia can then understand what you're saying. So, as I promised, here are some tips on how to speak differently. It's so important for you to speak so they understand. It may make sense to you, but probably not to them. So that whole long, first we're going to go to the grocery store, then we're going to go to the bank, then we're going to go see Aunt Susie, and then we're going to go out for lunch, right? I can't believe I even remembered all 4 of those. But think about it. If a cognitively capable person is struggling, imagine how confusing that would be to someone with dementia. You lost them at "we're going to go" because their brain's like, okay, we're leaving. What am I supposed to do when we're leaving? All right. And they've totally stopped listening to you. So it's really important to use short phrases, not long, complex sentences. So we want to make sure that, so for instance, what you would say is, we're going to go for a ride in the car, or we're going to leave, keep it even shorter. We're going to leave. Let's put our shoes on. And then back to the very first slide, when we talk about the 4 ways of learning, if they don't understand, put your shoes on, and depending on what stage your loved one is at, usually it's early to mid stage. So not mild cognitive impairment, not early stage, but early mid to mid stage. The individual will not know what "put your shoes on" means. So the best thing to do is get used to bringing your shoes out and their shoes out, sit next to them and hand them their shoes, and you put your shoes on and they will put their shoes on. One of the things about Alzheimer's specifically is that it creates mirroring behavior. In other words, that means that someone doesn't know, if they don't know how to do something, they will look around their environment and see what everybody else is doing. So that means that if you put your shoes on, they'll be like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to put my shoes on. So I always talk about, when in doubt, act it out. And you'll see that in the slides too. But the key here too is to don't ramble on and to focus on what you're saying, get their attention, sit in front of them and communicate with them. I had one client who was explaining that he was in the kitchen preparing their dinner and he was talking to his wife. Well, the TV was on. So she was overstimulated. She's got the TV on so she can hear stuff in her ears. Doesn't matter if she was watching it or not. And then he's saying, go set the table or put the glasses out or whatever instruction he was giving her. And she didn't do it. And I said, all right, so put some soft music on so it's relaxing. And then I said, and then when you want her to do something, set down what you're doing, stop washing those vegetables or stop stirring that pot, and go over to her and say, could you help me set the table? And that it may even be too generic. Can you get the silverware? Would be better because it's more specific. He could even pull open the drawer and then she would know to pull out the forks, the knives, and the spoons. So it's about assisting without taking over, because the next thing he did was to say, oh, well, I just did it myself. It was faster. And I said, you took away an opportunity for her to be independent. And so we have to allow, just like we do with other human beings, we have to allow them to make mistakes. We have to allow them to try. And if they fail, so what? We're talking silverware here. Most of the time, you're not talking about anything that's really, truly critical. Now, when it comes to safety, absolutely, we have to be careful with that, especially around anything that can hurt them in any way, shape, or form, whether it's stairs, stoves, hot oven, hot water, whatever that might be. But in most cases, in these types of small tasks, like putting on your shoes or getting the silverware out, those are wins. Those are big wins for them because you've enabled them to be independent. And that's really our goal here, is to communicate so that you can assist, but not take over any task or activity. So the next thing is avoid giving them more than 2 choices. So keep it simple. The important thing about keeping it simple is that you don't want to say, I don't know if you guys have ever been to Cheesecake Factory, but if you look at their menu, it's pages upon pages upon pages of food. And then you ask for a salad and they say, oh, which dressing would you like? Well, what do you have? And no matter what restaurant you go to, well, we got blue cheese, ranch, Thousand Island, balsamic vinaigrette, raspberry vinaigrette, honey mustard, and they go through this huge list. And you're trying to remember, what was the second one? And so think about that. That's a complicated conversation to have, even though we're just talking about salad and dressing. Well, they struggle, those with Alzheimer's struggle with complex decisions. So ask, would you like peas or carrots? And then if they say carrots, now remember, this is a really important factor. A lot of times we assume all of our lives, frankly, like I know my brother does not like walnuts in Jell-O salad, but if he has Alzheimer's, he may decide he loves walnuts in Jell-O salad now. So they don't remember the programming that we create in our lives. I don't like walnuts, or I don't like carrots. That's changing because they're changing. So they're kind of an open book now. Maybe they're going to love carrots and hate peas versus the other way around now. You have to give them the opportunity to try because now it's all new. So that's why we want to keep it simple. Would you like peas or carrots? Even put down 1 pea and 1 carrot and take a fork and set it down on the plate. Don't feed them. That's usually, if at all, late stages. Even my mom, who was late stages when she passed, could pick up a fork and feed herself. But it's all unique journey. Everybody's journey is a little bit different. So we want to make sure that we give all the possibilities, and then that gives you lots of options. So you might try a pea, try a carrot, see what they like, even if they never liked either one. Now, here's another tough one. We live in a very busy, fast-paced world. And so we tend to want to get an answer just like that. I asked you a question, you expect an answer. I told you to put on your shoes, I expect you to put them on. Well, here's the thing. As we age, even without dementia in the picture, we slow down on how we process information. So that means that you have to give this person 20, 30 seconds. And that's a very long time when you're standing there waiting, not the 5 seconds we usually do. So when you say, would you like peas or carrots? They're going to look at the peas and the carrots. They're going to think about what you just said. Their brain is going to go, do we like peas? Do we like carrots? They may reach in and try one to see what they want. That's all fine. But it's a different experience than what you're used to. So basically, if I were to take one thing away from this whole thing, it's like, slow down. Let this person process information as they can. And then if you don't see a response after a certain period of time, then you can assist. But don't take away their independence and their ability to try to process information. And of course, as I said before, don't argue with them or try to correct them. I have a friend whose sister constantly tries to correct her mom's memories. And that's just, it's mean. I can't think of a better way to put it. because you're not going to win, right? She's always going to remember things a little bit differently than you do. She has a different perspective because we as humans, when we all witness the same thing, we would recount that story a little bit differently. We all process things through our own window of reality and perception. So what the daughter saw was not what the mom saw. And the mom was adamant, and then the daughter was arguing with her, saying that's not what happened. And that is the worst thing you can do, because it's damaging the relationship. The mother will remember that the daughter is just argumentative and she's not fun to be around. And so she's going to go inside. She's going to not interact with her as much anymore, because that person, whoever it is, in this case, the daughter, is constantly correcting her and telling her that she's wrong. You don't want to do that. You don't want to. The only thing you've got is this relationship, and you can continue to nurture it and build it. It's just going to be different. So avoid getting frustrated. Yes, they're going to ask the same question multiple times, but here's the thing. Even though they don't have short-term memory, I've basically found when I've worked with families individually that I'll ask them, well, what have you said? So I have a client right now who said, Dad keeps saying, when are you going to come visit? When are you going to come visit? And she's like, Dad, I'm not coming today. And I said, oh, he used the word visit. And he keeps asking the same question because he knows what visit means. You just said, I'm not coming to visit. I'm not coming today. She didn't say visit. And I said, use the word visit, mimic the words that he's using, because those are the ones that resonate with him. So in a lot of cases, we're actually using words we assume they know, and they don't. And guess what? Just to make it more interesting, they may not remember a word today, but they'll remember it tomorrow or later on this afternoon. So you can see why caregivers get frustrated. So this is your chance to make this into a lighthearted game as opposed to a frustrating situation. It becomes, how do I find the word that's working today? That's the game. So it may be that visit versus come over are two different things to them. And visit works one day and come over works another day. But it's really important that you mix your words up. When people get frustrated is when the person asks the same question and you parrot it back and say, I just told you the doctor's appointment is at 10 o'clock, as an example. Well, if it didn't resonate with them the first time, you repeating yourself or raising your voice, which is even worse, doesn't help. And it causes them to shut down. And now you've got a person who's not even receptive to you communicating because you get frustrated with them. So it's really important that first, take a deep breath if they ask the question over and over again, and now make it a challenge to yourself. How can I say this differently? So instead of saying, the doctor's appointment is at 10 a.m., try, we're going to head out. We're going to leave in about 10 minutes, and just don't talk about the doctor. Maybe the word doctor doesn't resonate, or it creates fear or some sort of unknown emotion that you're not seeing. So just say, we're going to leave in 10 minutes. Let's put our shoes on, whatever is the next activity. Let's get in the car. Keep it simple, break it down to small activities and small bits of information. And here's the tough one. I had a gentleman say, my wife is lying to me. And I said, where's that coming from? And he said, I told her that we had a meeting at 4 o'clock, and she told me that I never told her. And I said, she has dementia. She doesn't remember that you told her. Why would you say she's lying? Well, I did tell her though. And I said, okay, let's think about this. It's not lying. It's, and you have to change how you view how they communicate with you. And she was early stages. So I said, do you think you could, when you don't remember something, can you, instead of saying you didn't tell me, can you change your words to I don't remember? Or could you tell me again? And she said, I think I can remember that. And I said, okay, well, let's write it down. Because if you can get the individual who has mild cognitive impairment or early stage dementia, repeat something that you've told. So let's say it together so we both remember it. We have a doctor's appointment tomorrow at 10 a.m. and you both say it together. Then it's like, all right, let's write it down. You write it down and I'll say it out loud. So this is that whole 4 steps to how do you get someone to hear, speak, write, and then read to help them take that information and put it into long-term memory. So is this going to work with someone who has mid-stage Alzheimer's? Probably not. It might, depends. Again, these journeys are unique. So some things will work for you and some won't, which is why we spend, 45 minutes to an hour trying to go through different techniques. And then of course, those of you who are attending, you are welcome to go to my website and set up a 30-minute free consultation so that you can get at least 1 or 2 of your questions answered free of charge. Now, so they're not lying. Don't assume they are. They don't know. They just don't know. So you can't take it personally. That's the problem, is we look at them as if they're cognitively capable and we treat them that way. And that's where that angst and that anger and that frustration comes from. Well, you can control how you react, can't you? So that's really what it comes down to, is controlling how your conversation goes, how you react to where they're at in that period of time, which might be morning, afternoon, next week, next month. I just don't really know. Now, here's another thing. Don't ignore them or not include them when talking with others. I had a gentleman who had hearing loss, and hearing loss is connected with dementia because the brain can't process information fast enough because it can't hear. So it just starts to shut down and doesn't engage and doesn't participate anymore, and therefore can create some symptoms associated with dementia. So one of the challenges for him was that he said to me, I can't remember and I can't hear very well, but I want to be part of the conversation. And I said, well, maybe it's too loud in that room. Why don't you grab a few people and move to another room where it's a little quieter? No, I don't want to miss anything. So people were having conversations around him without him being able to participate. So he felt left out. So it's important. And then I had a situation where my mom was in memory care and caregivers were talking over her head. And I stopped them and said, hey, she's sitting right in front of you. And it's important that you, whether she's part of the conversation or not, that she see the people who are talking. She can't even see you. She can just see part of your body. So it's important for you to sit in front of her, even though you're talking to each other. You wouldn't do that to somebody who didn't have Alzheimer's. Why would you do it to this person who does? So we don't want to write them off. Now, if they do have mid to late stage dementia, and this is specific to Alzheimer's, you'll see this more with Alzheimer's, you want to position yourself at their level. So you're looking into their eyes. They're watching your face. So when you say something, if you don't, have any expression, they're going to struggle because now, without any visual aid, meaning your facial expressions, they don't know exactly which way to understand what you're saying. So don't feel like they assume that they know who you are. Most of the time, and this is like every daughter's worst nightmare, is, I'm afraid my mom won't remember me. And I said, if they're not hydrated, if they're not eating well, you're going to see a decline in their cognitive impairment, in their cognitive capability. So it's okay to introduce yourself. Every time I greeted my mother, I gave her a kiss and said, hi, Mom, it's Pam. And some days she would recognize me and greet me. And then other times, she'd just pat my hand. She always knew who I was. But that's the other thing too, when you're communicating, sometimes you expect a bigger reaction when you see someone who knows you. And sometimes you're not going to get that. And it's just because they're inside themselves, right? They're just either they're sad about their situation, the early cognitive impairment, they are very much aware of what's happening, and it's heartbreaking because this is not something that anybody wants to have happen to them. So you have to come in and be reassuring and say, you know what, it doesn't matter. I love you. We're going to get through this together. And I had to coach a husband because he said, my wife thinks I'm having an affair. And that's, by the way, that's also, I hear that a lot. And I said, well, how many times a day do you tell her you love her and how special she is to you? And he's like, well, I tell her. And I said, well, remember, she has cognitive impairment, so she may not understand the way you're saying it. So mix up the different ways that you say, you are so special to me. I love you so much. I can't imagine spending any time without you in it. And remember how we first met, and, go down that path, because it's just too easy to forget that they can't remember, oddly enough. So just as a reminder, show, don't instruct. Don't tell them to go sit down with them. If they're going to eat, sit down and eat with them. Remember that mirroring need. All right. And so when in doubt, act it out. Now, if it's a complicated task, and this is something that happens in restaurants in particular, but any place that does the silverware rolled up in a napkin, I'm not quite sure why they ever thought that was a good idea, but I guess it's easier to carry that way. And so I've watched my mom and I've watched others watch the table to see. It's like, all right, I need silverware. My food's here. I need something to eat it with. But they don't know somebody hid the silverware in the napkin. So, being able to make it apparent that either don't necessarily unwrap the napkin for them. This is them being independent, but you can, unwrap your napkin yourself. And you can even say something like, well, I hate it when they hide the silverware in the napkin. And then you might see that light bulb go on where it's like, oh, the silverware's in the napkin. And then they'll mimic what you did. Please, please, please remember, you're going to have good days and bad days. I'm sure that anyone who's here, who's been through this or is experiencing it right now, knows that there's good days and bad days. Just take a deep breath on those bad ones and know that a good one's right around the corner. Accept that even with each interaction, things are going to be different each time. Now, I will tell you that surprisingly, they do have peaks and valleys, right? So good days, bad days. But on the good days, they can be really good days, especially early on in the disease. And you'll think the person's totally normal and that they've been lying or deceiving you, which is what I've heard from spouses. I think she's fine most of the time. And then she pretends like she can't remember. And I'm like, oof, no, that's not really pretending. It's just that this is a very variable and unique disease. And it's just unpredictable. So give yourself and your loved one grace and accept what day you get, whether it's a good one or a bad one. The other thing to watch out for is tone. So I've heard sons and daughters and spouses say something that sounds positive, but their tone is off. So it always has to come from a loving, calm place. I love you. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. That's what I'm here for. I love you so much, and we'll figure it out. But don't treat them like, well, here, let me do that for you. We try to be helpful, and we just kind of are helicopter caregivers, for lack of a better phrase. We're just right there for them to, here, let me do this for you. Here, let me do that for you. And that's not really helping them. Yes, if they struggle, absolutely step in and say, I have problems with this too. So don't make it seem like it's just them that's got a problem. Say, I have problems getting my arm in the sleeve sometimes too. Here, I'll hold it and you put your arm in. See how that's different than just saying, here, I'll do it for you. So again, this person's still in there. And if you're degrading to them or in some way disrespectful, or treat them like a child, that's going to create some relationship problems. They're going to be resentful. And then when they see you next, you're going to wonder why they won't talk with you. Well, you kind of stepped out of line. And that's really hard for adult children to realize. I saw a book called Parenting Your Parents, and that just sent me off. I'll tell you, I'll be very honest with you, because they're still your parents and they still deserve respect and dignity. And you still need to realize that they're in there and that you're not parenting them. So I'm not happy about the title of that book, but we don't want them to feel ashamed of themselves. We want them to feel like, hey, I can still have moments of joy. I can still interact. It may not be the way you expect, but I can still do that. Let me do that. Now, we're human. So there were days when I would get frustrated with my dad, who had vascular dementia. And he was, vascular dementia tends to create more behaviors. So he would accuse people of stealing some of his stuff. He'd be angry. He's a very logical individual, but he would get angry for good reason, sort of like take it up a notch more than it needed to be. So it's like, look, Dad, you know what? You're getting frustrated. I'm frustrated. Why don't we just call it good? Let's have some chocolate, watch TV together. So divert the frustration for both of you, because it will happen. Or frankly, just give them a kiss, say, I love you. I need to go. I would always blame my dogs and say, hey, I have to take the dogs out to go potty. And that always worked. So speaking of that, let's talk about how to greet and leave if you're visiting. So if you're an adult child or your loved one is in a care community, greeting is always at their level, and you give them a big hug, because only people they know give them hugs. And sometimes if they're in a bad mood and they don't want to be touched, let it go and just say, eye level, I love you. And I just came over to say hi and see how everything is going. And it's okay to say, like I said, hi, Mom, it's Pam. Every single time for 8 years, that's what I told her. But if there's visitors coming, you want to make sure, like if you bring grandkids or kids or whatever, don't bring a whole bunch of people in all at once. Have them, kind of stand back and bring each one up and say, hey, this is your grandson, Bobby. And let Bobby say, hi, Grandpa or Grandma, and give them a big hug and say, I love you. I'm going to go stand over here, and then bring in the next person and one by one. And then you can all sit down at their level and have a conversation, but make sure that they're part of the conversation. In other words, there's not a group of you having a conversation and they're sitting there by themselves or with just one person. They're going to feel left out. They are capable of recognizing that they're being left out. And then here's the tough one, leaving. Leaving makes you feel terribly guilty. And it's like, oh my gosh, should I stay an hour? Should I stay 45 minutes? Should I stay 2 hours? Should I stay 3? There's a whole visiting conundrum especially if they're in memory care. And so I would go visit twice a week. You don't want to say, and I heard a son say this to his father, and it created this huge miscommunication. He said, Dad, we'll be back on Sunday. Well, the dad doesn't know when Sunday is. Frankly, talk to anybody who's retired. They don't know what day it is. I barely know what day it is. So to say I'll be back on Sunday. So the father said, well, is Sunday tomorrow? No, Dad, Sunday is in 3 days. Is it tomorrow though? And the son started getting angry, and the caregiver saw it, the professional caregiver saw it, and said, well, I'm gonna, hey, George, do you want to get some ice cream? Well, they need to go. We'll see them later. And, George is like, ice cream? Sure. And people with Alzheimer's tend to love sugar. I'll just say that. So being able to divert the conversation was a good thing, but the son kept talking, was hell-bent on saying, we're going to be here on Sunday. Don't use the day of the week. Just say, I love you. I'll be back soon, or I'll see you later, or I'll be back, and don't even say soon. So I'll be back in a bit. It doesn't matter whether it's 3 days from now or a week from now. So just as another example, a colleague, or actually a client of mine, said, I couldn't believe it. I was gone for a week taking my daughter to college, and I came back. And this is a guy who would go visit his mother every single day. He comes back and he's like, Mom, I'm so sorry. I was gone for a whole week. And she said, what are you talking about? You were here yesterday. So don't feel guilty about your visits. Go have a life, get moments of joy to keep you healthy, and just know that their concept of time is muted. And so since we're getting close to the end of the time, I do know that they will be sharing the slide deck. So I'm going to skip this slide. But if you are taking your loved one for an outing, going to visit family and friends, this is a really helpful tips sheet on preparing the family, making sure that your loved one has a quiet space, and make sure that it's a safe environment for them, and that you have a caregiver for them, so that they know there's someone they can trust in case they have an accident. Always bring extra clothes, and also help them with visual cues in the house, in order where, a picture of the toilet and on the door where the toilet is. It would be really helpful. So those are important tips. Now, most of all, to wrap up, it's important that you create moments of joy, because these are your memories moving forward. And honestly, they're going to remember the happiness. So my mom was painting a birdhouse right after we just moved her into a new community. I was settling her room. I came into the activity center. My mother's never painted anything except for a wall in her life. She's never shown any artistic leanings. And she's there painting the birdhouse with the activities person, and had a wonderful time. So we used to do fun stuff. We used to bring her jewelry, sparkly costume jewelry, and we would put it on ourselves and dress up. And it was fun. And that's what this is about now. It's about having fun with things, and looking at things differently and not so seriously. Please remember that they are still in there. And lastly, communicating. And frankly, this whole journey can be exhausting. The statistics from the Alzheimer's Association show that a caregiver, so someone who physically lives with the individual, is or also a family caregiver like myself. My parents and I never lived in the same location together. However, I was thinking about them 24/7. So that stress gives you a 60% higher likelihood of having a stroke, and somewhere between 20 and 40% higher likelihood of the other chronic conditions of diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular, coronary, any of those type of events, including cancer. So we want to take care of ourselves if we really love that person and want them to be part of their lives as our journey progresses. So that means get some rest. That means go find something that's fun. Go get back with your gals for wine, or your guys for golf, or combine the two. Whatever it is, do something that gives you joy. Go hang out with grandkids, whatever it might be, and get some help. Let's put aside this whole, well, if we have help, then that means there's something wrong with us. No, if you remember, affluent people in the early 1920s were the people with help. So you guys have worked hard to be where you are and to get where you are, as have your loved ones with dementia. It's really important that you get some help, and you can in-home care. I have resources for that if you want to talk about that. But having someone come in and do light housekeeping or light cooking, or entertain your loved ones so you can go do something outside the home so that they're safe, it's good for everyone. They don't need to see you all the time, and you're not trained or skilled in taking care of them either when it comes to brain stimulation and engagement, but a caregiver should be. And just remember, you cannot do it all. We have the society of I've got this. No, you don't. This is way too hard for just one individual. Get help, talk to people, sit down with me, and we can have a conversation about ways to help cope with this journey and manage it, because it's extremely emotional and taxing. So it's important that you don't suffer so that your loved one doesn't suffer. We want you around to support them and be with them as long as you can, because joy is the better option. So as I said, you're going to get the slides. So these are some links in there. You can just click on them. But for activities and guidance, I highly recommend the Alzheimer's Foundation of America. They actually have a magazine. I'm published in it every quarter, by the way. So look for my articles. But there's a thing they have called the Green Room, and it's filled with activities and videos and all sorts of things that you can sit your loved one down in front of your computer and have them participate. You would participate with them, hopefully, or a caregiver can do the same. If you're looking for research and more data, it won't necessarily help you, but sometimes people like to be more informed. You can go to the Alzheimer's Association, different organizations, guys. One is more about caregivers and one's more about research. They overlap. So both of them are excellent organizations for research. And then locally, you might have a memory cafe. You can always reach out to your local memory care community and say, where are there places where my loved one can get out and go do something so that they're getting stimulated, because sitting at home watching TV is the worst thing for them. And then there's also the National Family Caregiver Support Program. So there's lots of other resources if you want more. This is how you reach out to me. So email anything that you have questions on to Pam at It's Not That Simple, which is the name of my book. So that's .com is my email. And then for all of you, so there's was 104 of you here. I am offering you a free 30-minute consult with me. I do that because one, I feel like we can get through at least one or two questions. And then that first 30 minutes is yours, and we can stop right there. We can determine whether we're a good match for each other. And then if you need additional support over time, then we can talk about that as well. The best way to reach me is both at pam@itsnotthatsimple.com or go to my website at alzheimersfamilyconsulting.com. I'm also on Facebook as well as YouTube and LinkedIn. So just if you just type in my name in the Google search, you should be able to find me. So that is it. I do want to remind you that there is a raffle. So someone, a lucky person that's here, will receive a free book that's signed by me, and I will mail that to you. So thank you. And Allegra, I'm going to hand it back to you to answer questions.
Oh, perfect. Pam, thank you so much for your insightful presentation. You've been able to take your own personal experience with your parents, which I can imagine has its up and downs, into something positive to help other caregivers going through the similar situations. So thank you so much. I, at this point, would like to invite our audience to submit their questions. If you could please use the Q&A box, and I will read your question to our presenter as they come up. And while our audience is working on their questions, I would like to ask you a question, Pam. So a diagnosis of dementia is never easy. It's going to impact everyone in the family, and each family member might respond differently. And I have noticed that it might be daunting to accept the progression of the disease and understand that this person will eventually lose their cognitive abilities. What would you tell a family caregiver whose loved one has been diagnosed with dementia, and yet this family caregiver continues to try to reason with their loved ones when the loved one is no longer able to follow and process information?
Wow, that was a mouthful. So that's pretty much what I do for a living these days. So to me, when you have resistance, and frankly, it is very common for people to resist. I don't call it denial. Denial means that you refuse to accept a diagnosis. Resistance is, gosh, I really don't want to go down this path. I don't want to change my behaviors. So the best thing to do, and I'm not self-promoting, but is to read my book or buy that book for any book on Alzheimer's. But my book actually walks you through what this emotional journey looks like, what questions to ask, how to communicate, all those different stages that you go through. And the reason why I wrote it that way is because I wish somebody had told me the things that are in my book. And so they can pick it up and read the information, and then they just read one chapter. No chapter is more than 10 pages to keep it short and simple, but it allows them to go, wow, I need to think about that. And books tend to, and the reason why I recommend reading, giving them a book as a gift, is that they can assimilate the information at their pace. You trying to force them to go to at your pace is going to be much more difficult. So we're all different. We all deal with emotions and sadness and diagnoses differently. And so books allow us to pace ourselves. Does that help?
Yes, thank you, Pam. Another question from the audience says, how do you get help when the person won't accept anyone to come in to help for a few hours a week?
I'm dealing with this right now with a client. Boy, the whole family is heartbroken because this person's very independent. And she's like, I'm going to live at home. I'm going to live alone. I don't want any help. And there's the biggest thing and it's unique to every person, but with her situation, her family are actually triggers for her. And that happens a lot. So having a professional in-home care agency knock on her door and say, we're here to evaluate the safety of your home. You've decided to live alone. A loved one, a caregiver, someone who doesn't create that trigger behavior of don't tell me what to do, right? So there's family dynamics in all of this, which don't make it any easier or doesn't make it any easier. And so by bringing their favorite person, it could be a grandchild, a niece, a nephew, whoever it is, have their favorite person bring this in-home care agency. They're an assessor. They're going to look at the environment. They're going to look at the individual. And so if we can get their foot in the door, and then they're very good usually about building rapport with the individual. Now, none of the family triggers are involved, just their favorite person and this in-home care agency assessor. And then that person can then turn around and say, I really enjoyed our conversation. Can I come back? Or can I send someone here to kind of keep you company? So let them do the dirty work, if for lack of a better phrase, let them, but you can't do it on your own. That's the problem. We all try to force people to do things within our families, and it rarely works. So get some help if you need in-home care agency recommendations. I'm happy to help with that. And I'm sure that you guys also have references and resources as well. So get your resource people to help you find the right in-home care agency and put them to work so that they can get that person some companionship and some stimulation and make sure that they're getting the nutrition and hydration that they need and the sleep that they need.
Thank you. Another question is, what are the determining factors for considering memory care facility versus home care with the caregiver?
So I actually talk about that in my book. And I also have an article. You can get these hard copies for free at Alzheimer's Today. It's the alzfdn.org website. Just to go under media, and then you can actually read these online too. And one of the articles I wrote was, how do you know what questions to ask memory care? But the decision between in-home care and memory care has more to do, well, there's a couple things. And again, because the symptoms are so different per individual, your situation is unique. So here's the things to look at. One is for in-home care, absolutely 100% do it. If you have someone with dementia in your world, you need a break and you need in-home care, and you need to make sure that you ask about dementia training and for these caregivers. That ultimately will get really expensive as the disease progresses. So meaning that it could be $150,000 to $200,000 if you have someone doing 24/7 care. And so that's why a lot of people say, okay, there's a price threshold. When we hit $70,000, it's time to move to memory care. Well, okay, so there's one factor. It could be budget. The other factor is stimulation and engagement. I hate to say it, but if you're living with someone with dementia, you are probably not skilled in brain stimulation and engagement. You're not bringing in entertainment, you're not bringing in musicians, you're not doing activities that there's not enough people around typically, unless you have them living with a family. So you're trying to manage all of these things all on your own potentially. And so what the memory care provides is an environment where their brain is stimulated, their vision is stimulated, everything is stimulated. Here's the catch though, is that I prefer that you move from in-home care to assisted living and then move up the chain of services so that it's assisted living with memory care. Because the only time when you really need a secure facility is when the loved one has wandering issues. And frankly, that's usually because they're not entertained, they're not tired out from a memory care community. So if you have someone who wants to leave the house at night, they're going to do that at your home, but they probably won't do it at memory care because you get up at 7 o'clock and you are going for the most part till 7 o'clock that evening. You've got stuff going on all the time. They go to sleep and they sleep. So part of the issue is what you would see at home, and behaviors may totally disappear if they were in assisted living with a caregiver, either a professional caregiver hired for the first few days, for 30 to 60 days. And then that gives the new caregivers a chance to get to know the individual. But if they're not at flight risk, if they're not someone who's typically going to wander, there's no reason to not go to assisted living and have more engagement with people. So that's my preference, but that's kind of the continuum, right? Is in-home care, activity centers, going to assisted living is for as long as you possibly can. And then eventually maybe it does end up in memory care, but it's a progression. It's a continuum. It's not home by yourself or with your loved one, and then boom, you're in memory care. That's not necessary.
Yeah. And it is 101. We have a hard stop at 105. So Pam, I'll get another question to you, and we will be able to point folks to speak to you directly for some of their questions as well. But if you mess up one day, so they have a bad emotional memory, how can you heal that relationship?
So the good news is there's a blessing in having short-term memory. But what you have to do is overlay a positive memory. So, and it can be difficult. I'm not going to, it depends on the individual. Again, all unique situations. And honestly, in these situations, it's trial and error. So let's use my example of the gentleman who was getting stuffed animals thrown at him because he got his wife upset for trying to put her sweater on. I said, all right, bring flowers, bring chocolate. What's her other favorite thing? Find favorite things, favorite memories, and say, look what I found, or something that you both had from 40 years ago. Look what I found. Or come with somebody else who has a positive memory, like a daughter or a son or a niece or a nephew or a grandchild, so that, they're not going to throw stuff at you in front of them, most likely. So then you re-imprint a positive memory on it. And then that takes time for them to feel safe with you again, because in a lot of cases, they feel like you violated them, meaning that you tried to take over something that they were totally capable of doing. And so they get resentful. So bring positive things to the situation, including positive people, and maybe don't try to be so involved in their lives. Let the person who you bring with you have all the conversation, and you just sit there with your mouth shut, because you're re-imprinting a positive memory for them, and you could ruin it all just by saying, here, let me do that for you, right? So and this is what I do day in and day out, guys, is these questions come in. It's like, all right, so let's talk about toileting. Let's talk about showers. Those are the two favorites. Let's talk about this negative imprinting versus positive imprinting in ways that we can try and see how it goes, and then touch base and work through other options and possibilities. So
thank you. Well, we are at the end of the program, and What an honor to have you present today, Pam. This presentation has been very informative and helpful to those who are struggling to communicate with their loved ones. I know we have not been able to answer all your questions in the audience, but Pam has offered to give everyone in the audience a 30-minute consultation for free. We provided the speaker's email address, so please feel free to reach out to her directly. And to our audience, I want to thank you so much for making space today and joining us. We very much appreciate your time. As you sign out, there's going to be that brief survey. Please take a moment to answer those questions and let us know your thought about today's presentation and help us provide topics you're interested in. This was our first webinar of the Caregiver series. Our next webinar, yes, will be on Wednesday, March 15th at noon, and that will be Understanding Dementia for Caregivers with Dr. Lawler. And she'll provide an overview of the different types of dementia, such as the Lewy body dementia, vascular, frontal temporal. Did I say that right, Pam?
Yep.
Okay.
And Alzheimer's. Yeah. Those are the top four. Someone had asked a question about dementia, regular dementia. There's over 100 types of dementia. The top four are Alzheimer's, 70% of people, 18% have vascular, and then it goes down from there to Lewy body and then frontal temporal, which is usually people who are under the age of 65.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you. So she'll be covering, also Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, along with suggestions for techniques and medications that can help with difficult behaviors. In addition, we'll be offering a health and wellness workshop. Our first session will be on memory cafes. So if you're interested in learning activities and things you can implement at home to support a loved one with dementia, please join us for that on March 24th. And once again, I just want to thank everyone. Thank you so much, Pam, for your time. And I hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.